Imagine it's 1935 and you're a Soviet agronomist. Not just any agronomist, though. You're the founder and head of the Lenin All-Union Academy of Agricultural Sciences. And among your many accomplishments, your research had led you to propose that certain crops, like the rye that helped feed your fellow comrades, were basically an accident. Humans didn't domesticate them. Thanks to evolution, they domesticated themselves. Oh, and your reward for all your hard work? You just lost your job. One of your academic rivals has the ear of Joseph Stalin, and neither of them believe biology works the way you do. You are Nikolai Ivanovich Vavilov, and the next 8 years of your life do not get better. But decades after your death, scientists totally got your back and proved you were right. Let's turn back the clock just a bit and establish Vavilov's credentials. This was a guy obsessed with the history of plants, or more specifically, the science of the history of plants. I'm talking stuff like heredity, genetics, and natural selection. He did a lot of research trying to find where important crops were first domesticated and what happened as they spread to other parts of the world. He also basically invented the concept of a seed bank, and there is a great story about the one he founded in Leningrad, but we don't have time to get to that today. Domestication is the process of humans turning wild plants and animals into versions that are useful to us and that we take care of. Meanwhile, cultivation is what we call it when farmers grow and care for those domesticated plants. But for as long as there have been cultivated crops, there have been weeds. Unwanted plants growing among the crops and competing with them for space and resources. For most of human history, farmers' approach to weeding was pretty basic. They looked for plants that didn't belong and used plows, hoes, or just their hands to yank them out. This means that the weeds that looked the most like the crops they were infiltrating would have been the most likely to escape farmers' notice, survive, and pass on their genes. That's right, those farmers became the unwitting agents of natural selection, and this brings us to the concept of Vavilovian mimicry. You may have heard of other types of mimicry, like Batesian mimicry. That's where a tasty or harmless animal copies the appearance of a bad-tasting or dangerous one. But those caterpillars didn't just start off looking like tiny snakes by sheer coincidence. It took generations for the less snake-looking caterpillars to get eaten before they got to pass on their genes. Our weeds don't want to die either, and the ones more likely to stay growing in the field are the ones that best resemble the crop the humans are trying to grow. And in some cases, evolution wound up making a weed that was such a good crop mimic, it wound up making a new crop quality plant. This is what Vavilov figured out. Based on his years of investigating crop domestication, he traced wheat, which humans domesticated around 10,000 years ago, back to an area of southwestern Asia where it was especially genetically diverse and had a long history of cultivation. And when he was there, he learned that some wheat farmers saw rye as a weed and made a point of removing stray rye stalks from their fields. In fact, you can translate the Turkish common name for rye to the plant that torments the wheat and barley. Based on this, Vavilov realized that early wheat farmers could have accidentally domesticated rye by nudging it to blend in with wheat better and better over time. Rye would have developed bigger, easier to harvest seeds as it evolved to more closely match wheat. Because rye is also more cold and drought tolerant than wheat, farmers realized what they had and started growing it on purpose. The earliest evidence for domesticated rye dates to about 8,600 years ago. Now, Vavilov didn't name all of these weed to crop mimics after himself. He called them secondary crops. And today we've identified a lot more examples of secondary crops and even confirmed them with genetic studies. For example, a study published in 2022 backs up Vavilov's original idea that rye started out as a weed. And multiple studies have shown that at least one common variety of oat originated this way. As oats got better at mimicking barley, they evolved bigger seeds that stayed on the plant until harvest instead of dropping off as soon as they were mature. Yet another crop that started out as a Vavilovian mimic is false flax, an old oilseed crop that's now seeing a resurgence as a potential biofuel source. But not every Vavilovian mimic turns into a useful crop. Sometimes natural selection just makes sneakier weeds. For example, some populations of a weed that grows in Chinese rice paddies have evolved to look more like baby rice plants. This makes it harder for farmers to find and get rid of them. They're definitely still weeds though. But Nikolai Vavilov would not live to see any of these developments. I mean, it would be hard for a man born in 1887 to read a paper published in 2022. But in the 1930s, the USSR wasn't really a great place to be a great scientist. For one thing, Vavilov believed in the importance of collaboration and worked with plant scientists in other non-communist countries. This was at a time when the Soviet Union was becoming more and more isolationist, so Vavilov's connections made some of his fellow Soviets suspicious that he might be a spy. Meanwhile, Stalin was more into pseudosciences that fit with his own worldview than he was the ideas of legitimate researchers like Vavilov. One of the dictator's favorite so-called scientists was a guy named Trofim Lysyenko, who rejected what was known about genetics and evolution at the time. Instead, he claimed that environmental stress could spontaneously transform one type of crop into another. This fit well with the communist ideas about the right environment creating better, tougher people who could then pass these improvements on to future generations. Meanwhile, the real science of genetics, which Vavilov was a proponent of, was actually seen as anti-communist. Somewhere along the way, Lysyenko started bad-mouthing Vavilov, and even blamed him and other agronomists for his own research failures to develop new and improved crops. The USSR went through a really bad famine in the early 30s, so it makes sense that people would be wanting solutions fast. But maybe the government shouldn't have put a guy in charge who believed in utter baloney, and then told an actual expert to work under him. By 1935, Vavilov had been dismissed as the head of the academy he founded. Lysyenko, meanwhile, would be given the position 3 years later. Then in 1940, Vavilov was arrested in Ukraine while on a collecting expedition. He died of starvation in a Soviet prison in 1943, and for a while, his contributions to science were forgotten. Which is a bummer, but things started turning around in 1955, when Vavilov received a posthumous pardon from Stalin's successor, Nikita Khrushchev. The Soviet scientist, once accused of failing to feed his country, even got enough of a reputation glow up to get his face on a 1987 postage stamp, which I think works as a 100th birthday present. And over the past few decades, more and more botanists and weed scientists have come to appreciate Vavilov's ideas and theories. Granted, some scientists have argued that secondary crops aren't true mimics because of the accidental human meddling, but scientists have been using the term Vavilovian mimicry since at least 1982. And now what started out as a quirky idea about weeds domesticating themselves is a widely accepted theory. It's probably even more important now as humans try to develop fancy, high-tech ways to control weeds. For example, today's agriculture scientists are working on new ways to use cameras and machine learning to identify individual weeds for spraying in fields. This could provide a whole new source of selective pressure and create a new generation of Vavilovian mimics. Sunflowers and sugar beets, for example, both already have weedy relatives that look a little bit like them and could become even more like them with a nudge from natural selection. So on one hand, we could be forcing ourselves into a never-ending arms race with the weeds in our fields, but on the other, we could stumble into another way to feed people. And to keep the world fed is objectively a good thing. So thank you, Nikolai Vavilov, not only for showing us how plants can domesticate themselves, but upholding science when the forces around you would rather you not.